which is going to be late screen flow. And we're back. It is COMP125, and it's the summer 2016 semester at Centennial, and we are week 9, part 3 of our broadcast. Last day, we kind of reviewed object-oriented code, right, for JavaScript, and still, we only did 70% of our test. You know, I feel like I should put myself in a headlock because somehow, you know, you guys still don't understand object orientation, which is a bad thing. Again, I would refer you back, if you ever do, I know we're scratching the surface in this course with object-oriented JavaScript. I like to use my Typescript Playgrounds. I'll tell you why. Because I can use, with TypeScript, I can use, you know, classical kind of, you know, syntax to code JavaScript. And then what it does is it emits good JavaScript on this side that we can use, right? So I've shown you this before. And when you go to the work site, I highly recommend that you do the same thing. You kind of, if you don't know, because you guys have just learned object-oriented JavaScript, if you need to kind of create objects and classes, this might be a really cool way to do it, where you have a reference, and then you can always modify the JavaScript on the side, right? So that's the first thing that I would recommend, to help you with object-oriented JavaScript. But today, we're moving away from that. We're going to open up a new topic. Some of this we've already covered in previous classes because we've done strings, and we've also done regular expressions, right, in our other one of our other classes earlier on. I think it was like lesson 4 or 5, like really much earlier than this. And again, if I was going to structure the book a little bit differently, I probably would move this class a lot earlier, maybe I don't know, several weeks earlier. We can talk about regular expressions, and just before you do your you know, your things with your forms and everything else from a form validation expression and all that kind of stuff, it's really good. So again, I would refer you to the slides that we have online here. So if you go to your eCentennial, you're going to have slides for today. Yours is in PDF format. I've converted it. Mine is in PowerPoint format. That's just for your benefit. And this refers back to Chapter 8 from the book. All right. So we're looking at Chapter 8, where we're manipulating data with strings and arrays. Right. Again, the slide deck is for your use, right? But I'm going to skip through to the good parts, right? So we've talked about how to, you know, put the inner HTML of a particular element on a page. We've done that before. We've put out a string. Actually, we did a lot of input and output, right, already. How to connect to or make a reference to HTML elements on a page. We do that with something like get element by ID, using the document object, or some other kind of format like that, whether it's document or get element by class name, get element by name. There's many ways of connecting to the HTML document, right? And then once we've connected to it, like we said, we can use strings or other structures to you know, manipulate or control what's going into the element itself, right? And again, we're using in this particular example, they're using the inner HTML property of a particular element. So we know how to do those things. I'm going to go through it. One thing to note is when it comes to strings, anytime we have a UI, and it doesn't matter whether, again, whether you're using Android, and again, I have visitors here in the class, or whether you're using iOS, everything in the UI, and I mentioned this before to you guys, everything is a string, okay? And what we have to do a lot of times, especially when it comes to calculations, is parse or convert from a string to whatever data type we need to use. Now, the great thing is in JavaScript, we don't have very many data types, right? We only have number, we have string, we have Boolean, right? We have some other stuff. What else do we have? Say that again. Float, there's no float. There's only number, right? In JavaScript, the number is the only data type that takes care of everything, right? You can make it float, like, right? I like your thinking, right? There is no float. Even actually in TypeScript, there's no float. We just call it number, right? So if I was going to actually, when we talk about TypeScript later on in this semester, when you learn a little bit about that, we'll talk about it. So there's not a lot of data types here in JavaScript. And in fact, like we talked about before, we use dynamic typing or implicit typing in JavaScript. That's what we do. So we've talked about some of this before, where we have a string and we want to format the string, right? So I'm going to skip over this section because we've done string formatting. One thing to notice is there's a difference between string, lowercase s, and string, capital S. String is a built-in class, right? that is available actually in most languages. For example, in C#, there is a string class, right? In Java, there's a string class, right? In most languages, there's a string class, and in JavaScript too, right? And what we can do is we can use the different methods that are part of the string class. These are static methods. We don't have to instantiate a new string object or anything like that. And what we can do is we can use these methods to help us format strings. Okay, that's what this PowerPoint's all about, how to format strings. So I'm going to skip to the good parts. Here's some examples. Why would you think that 2 lowercase and 2 uppercase might be useful for us? I think these are 2 good methods that we can kind of use. What would you say, anybody? What would you say that these are 2 good methods to use? Anybody? When I'm comparing, okay. What else? What else? Why would I want to use like 2 upper or 2 lower? Why would I want to do that? Come on, guys. I want you guys to put your thinking caps back on, right? Pokemon Go, put that away, right? You got to keep plugging that every single time. You know that, right? And then, what was that? I have it? Okay, maybe I do. Anyways, but why would it be good? Well, think about the form example. I got a form, right? And what if I don't care what the user enters into a form? I want to convert it to upper or to lower. That's a good, good application of that. So I can. It doesn't matter what he enters. It's not case sensitive sometimes, and you can actually indicate that to the user if you're creating a form or using some kind of UI. That just enter your name, and whatever happens, I can convert that name to upper to lower. I can do whatever I want to do with it, and then on the back end, I can do comparisons just like that. So 2 upper and 2 lower are really, really important to know. Let's pull up our Visual Studio Code here, just to give you some examples of our code. I'm just going to pull this down. And again, I have to say that I'm a little bit, it bugs me that Visual Studio Code has changed a little bit. I know that in the nightly builds that they have out right now, that they fixed the problem with drag and drop. All right, so for those people who have noticed that Visual Studio Code, you've lost the ability to drag and drop. This is the latest release. And sorry, that's the wrong one. If I was to look at normally my lesson 9, and if I just do one of these, normally you expect it to open, and of course it doesn't open anymore, right? That's just a bug. And what they're going to do is they've fixed it in the nightly build, right? So I think in the next build of Visual Studio Code, I think we're going to be okay. But for now, we can always go open folder, and I can look at my folder up on the desktop for those people who are following along with Visual Studio Code, and I can kind of open up lesson 9. And then, as you can see on the left-hand side, we've got everything. Here's our app.js from last day. And again, we've kind of cleaned it up. There's nothing much in here. We've got an app started, right? So we've got a very, kind of a baseline of code that we're going to be using again today, right? So very, very simple. And let's kind of go back here for a second to use lesson 9. Now notice that we're going to put up all our code here. And I want to do some simple input and output, right? So if I want to use string functions, and again, I can't use the 2 upper or 2 lower, you might think, right? Okay, but can I do something like this? Do you think this is, can I do something like this? Can I put a string literal, like, my string? And can I do something like dot? And then, can I do 2 upper or 2 lower? Well, yes, you can, right? So even if you wanted to do 2 lowercase with a string literal, it's totally possible to do, right? So even though I'm using the string class and the examples up on the PowerPoint, so if you go to the PowerPoint, right, and you see that I'm using the string class 2 upper or 2 lower, it's any string that you can do that with. Because agency in this particular example is using a string, NOAA, right? Once we do this, and I'll just do the example here, right? So let's just try this out. So if I go var my string is equal to, and we'll just pull this over here for a second. So it's going to kind of cut and paste, right? So here's my string. And then if I, just to swipe this up for a second. Once I've done that, remember what Visual Studio Code does for us, right, is if I hover over it, it gives me the type, because JavaScript, what it does is says, well, we use duck typing, right? So if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck. I want you guys to remember that, right? So that means if it looks like a string and acts like a string, it's probably a string. So JavaScript sees this as a string. So then my variable, this variable, my string, JavaScript is interpreting as a string, which means I can do something like this. My string dot, and then 2 upper or 2 lower. I can use these kinds of things, and I get good code hinting to do that, right? Now here's the thing, 2 upper or 2 lower. What would you think it is? Do you think it's a property, or do you think it's a method? Method. Why is it a method? If you think about what it's doing here, if it's a property, it's going to be something like, it's going to have a property name. Like, for example, color might be a property. But if I have a verb, right, on my usually, typically the way developers make it, to lower, I'm doing something, behavior, method. And if you don't know that, you can always open it up. You can see that as I open this up, I get this idea where it gives you a some kind of a description of what it does. Converts all the alphabetic characters in a string to lowercase. Right now, what if they're already lower? Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Right? It'll still accept it. If I want to do a console.log, let's just do a console log. Right? So here's console log, and if I pump out my string now, right? You would think that, I'm just going to put this out there, if you were using some other language, right, like C# or Java, and if, let's say, for example, I had my string, okay, my string, let's see what it does here. Let's look at the thing that it tells us to do that. If I go to lower, right, it's a string method. Notice it gives a string, there's a string class, to lowercase. And then what comes after? Look what I'm getting for code hinting here. What comes after on the right side of to lowercase is colon string. What does that mean? Come on, guys. We've talked about this before, right? So one is, I know that it's a string, right? But there's something that's after the to lowercase. To lowercase is the method, right? It means that's what it's returning, right? That's what its return type is. So can I do this? Can I do my string to lowercase like this and just type out my string like this? And do I expect it to be lowercase? Here, let's put up some more things. Hold on a second. Just to give you a good example. My string, right? And now remember how we're going to run this. We're going to right-click, open up in terminal, right? And I'm going to use Light Server. We kind of used npm to download this one, right? Okay, let's take a look at this is our topic for this week. Let's take a look at the console to see what we're going to get. My string, right? We get everything as it was before. It didn't do the conversion. That's what you'd be forgiven to think. Tom, it didn't work, but actually it did, right? Remember, we don't just like we do in other languages. We don't create or destroy strings here. We actually can create a substring. So this is nice, and it's doing something, but it's returning it to nowhere. It's returning it to the bit bucket in the sky. It's going nowhere. Why? This returns a string. It doesn't convert this string into lowercase, right? So this is one part you need to understand. When we do any kind of string manipulation, formatting, whatever, you need to place it inside another string. So if I say var, new string, choose a new name, is equal to my string dealt to lowercase, I'm taking my string, sending it into a method, right? Is basically what I want you to think it like, and then returning the value, if I can type properly, new string into this new variable. And if you notice, I'm getting a string again. So the type is string. This returns a type of string. That's what it does. And now my string wouldn't be here. It would be new string, right? Because that's the one you want. The new converted string would be here. Right? So let's try this out. Again, if I go back, you can see that now my string is in lowercase. And if you really want to see the difference, if I go console log, right? So if I say original string, then let's say concatenate it with my string, right? And then if I go over here and I go the new string, right? You can see this part. And then if I go back to my terminal, you can see the original string is my string with some upper and lowercase characters, and the new string is lowercase. Okay. By the way, again, we see that it happened automatically because of what I'm using. I'm using Light Server, and it gives me an automatic. It's synchronized with my browser. Okay. So that's really what we talked about here, and I want you to think about this whenever we do kind of string manipulation with the string. Based on the string class and all the methods, the static methods that are part of that class, they usually return something. They don't manipulate or change the original string, okay? And actually, it's like that in a lot of other languages too, like Java and in C#. Okay, let's take a look. Different if it was a list. If it was actual list structure in C# or in Java, if you had a list, then you can use the, shuffle method of the list, and then it would actually change the pattern, the order of the list. This isn't a list. This is an array list kind of structure that we have in JavaScript. It's kind of a hybrid, right? But in this particular case, we don't do anything with it. We don't modify the original, we change, and we kind of assign everything to a new variable, usually, is what we do. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint to keep us on track. So we talked about this. Same thing with length, string length. We've talked about the length property, and there's other ones. If I want to see the character at a particular location, we can use that. Character code at. For the most part, I don't use this one. Character code at. I don't use a lot of character code conversions. We definitely could. Index of, right? And again, it gives you some methods of extracting information from strings, right? So string.index of a particular group of text, and then give me the index is what I'm looking for. The last index of, right? That kind of thing. And you can look at these methods. I'm not going to go through them for you, but they're all methods that are pretty useful that are part of the string class. Okay. Here's one that I really like, match, right? Match. Match is good because remember we just did regular expressions, right? And regular expressions, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about more about regular expressions today, right? We use regular expressions to do validation for forms a lot of times. Like for example, phone numbers, or we use regular expressions if we want to make sure that a particular item has a certain minimum length of characters. Like for example, I want a minimum of 6 characters for my username, and I want characters in my password that have this particular password pattern. Regular expressions. But also remember what I said. Is it okay? Is it enough? I'm just putting my hand up so you guys can actually answer this question again. I'm not actually ask somebody. Xavier, right? Yeah, man. Yeah. JavaScript, is it good enough for validation, for total validation for my app? Just the front end stuff, the front end JavaScript, is it good enough? What do I need to do to make validation stronger? Right? How do I validate things better? Right? It's not just the front end. What do I need to do? The what? No. Validation. I'm talking about form validation, right? So how do I do form validation better? JavaScript is the first line of defense. What's the second line of defense? The what? Patterns is kind of helps us with frontline stuff, right? But what about anyone else on this side? Come on, guys. How about the female developers over here? You guys have any input for me? How about the girl who got 5, right? Yeah. Hi. You get 5 out of 5. Tell me, what's the best way to validate stuff? With forms, right? Or any kind of input, user input. Sorry? HTML, is that what you said? Try catch? No, not really. Remember, I can turn off JavaScript, right? If I turn off JavaScript, is there any validation? No, right? And if I'm a smart hacker, I can totally turn off any HTML validation too, right? So what do I really need? Back-end validation. I can't just do validation on the front end. I got to have my code do back-end input validation to ensure that there's good validation happening. I can't just validate on the front end. Front-end validation, I can break it in 2 seconds, right? Anyone can. But this is good. Pattern matching, what it helps us do is help the user on the front end say, this is the pattern that I'm looking for. And we've kind of done this example before. The match method of the string object, strings, and the string class, and an example is, we can put in the regular expression pattern in there to say, hey, does this string contain this thing? Yes or no, true or false. And if it's not true, then we don't pass the validation on the front end. Okay, this is where it's really good. Okay. Here's another great one, Slice. I like Slice a lot because what it does is it kind of removes parts of the string, right? Again, it returns a substring. That's what I want you to think of. It doesn't actually monkey with the original string, just like the other ones didn't monkey with the original string. It returns a substring of the original string, and if you notice what it says is, here's the starting index, right? And here's the ending index that I want from a 0, from nothing to an ending index if I want to produce that. And I want you to read this. It extracts text from a string, starting with the position number in the string of the starting index argument, and ending with the character immediately before the position number of the ending index. All right. So again, you can take that string and create a substring. Okay. What's the difference between? What would you think the difference between slice and substring is? It's very similar, right? There's the two right on top of each other. And if you look at the difference, it's like, okay, string ending with the character immediately before the position number of the ending index. Again, does not allow. Here's the difference. Does not allow negative argument values, but this one does. Right? So be careful. There's 2 different ways to create a substring. One allows negative values, the other one does not. All right? Why would I need to create a substring? Again, let's say, for example, I have my name. I have a form. I'm going back to forms again. And my username is the person's entering in their full name, first name, maybe and last name. And assuming there's no middle name. And let's say they want to extract first name, the first characters, and I'm listening for a space, right? I can listen for it as a pattern match as well too. And I'm listening for the space, and I'm going to just take the first name. When I hit the space, that's my first name, and the rest, minus the space between the two things, my two names, is my last name. And I can take them and put them in assign them to two properties. So I don't have to get the user to put in his first name and last name separately, right? Dangerous, because you don't know what he's entering, right? You don't know if they're entering their first name first or last name first. You know, you can't decide that, and that's why we use, typically what we do is we use two different inputs, you know, to do that. But I'm saying you could do it, right? So I'm not going to go to this slide too much. You can look at the class methods involved. And one thing is you can also break down a string itself is an array of characters. That's another thing to note, right? So this example here really talks about if I want to really look at the string as an array of characters, you can do that too, right? Because that's really what it is. And actually, it's the same in every language, right? So it's really a string is an array of characters, no matter how you slice it, and no pun intended there, between, you know, if you're looking at Java, C#, even Swift, it's an array of characters. And it gives us the ability for us to slice and dice that array of characters into different parts if I want to. Well, again, we've covered this before. OK. I'm going to continue on. I'm not going to go into these examples. These are just more further examples of this. This is kind of neat. I like the idea of index of. Here's a good index of method. So email, again, is a string. It's a string that contains you know, different kinds of characters. And if I want to look for you know, a particular character, an example of this would be this @ character. I can see, you know, if this @ character is at position 10, and it returns a -1. Why? Because if I count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it'd be at position 9, right? This one is starting at 0, so that way it would. That's why it's returning a -1 because it's false, right? If it was true, it would say yes, it is at position 10. So it would give me a, you know, a true. I mean, it doesn't give me var at index. It's either a true or false. And if you notice, it says those that return a numeric position in a string. OK, so let's try this out. If you want to do the index of a particular element, let's see. Now we're saying what it is, but remember, index of is an overloaded method. And let me see if it was over here. I think it was here. Yeah. So it says performs a case-sensitive search, and this is something to note as well, and returns the position number in a string of the first character in the text argument, whatever we're looking for, right? So if I'm looking for the space, I can look for spaces too, right? In a string, if I have a word, let's take a look at that. So here's my example. Let's go to Visual Studio Code for a second. So let's say, you know, my string, let's put another little example string together. And let's say I'm going to put my first name, last name. So we'll call it first name, last name. Right, first name, last name, and let's use the, you know, John Smith, because my name is too long and complicated, right? And let's say, for example, I want to know the index of, because I know first name, last name is a string, and I'm going to return the position, right? So we'll call it space position for our variable name is equal to my first name, last name dot index of, right? And then I want to look at the index of a space without anything else. Notice that in the constructor, I have a question mark for the position. That means it's an optional parameter, right? Optional parameters means that I don't have to, if I want to, I don't have to put it in. I do, however, have to put in the search string that I'm looking for. If I put the position, I'm testing to see if it's going to give me that position. And notice it returns a number, right? That means I'm going to get a number back, the position of where I have the match, all right? So if I'm right, and if you calculate it, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, I should get the number 4 back based on what I'm looking for. Okay, this is a very useful function. All right, so let's take a look at that. So I'll say console log. And again, space position, right? And we'll see, we'll get a number. Hopefully we're going to get the number 4 back, right? There it is, number 4, okay? Questions around that? So all I'm doing is using when we do any kind of string manipulation, you taking off too? Oh, my tears are crying, right? Okay. Whenever we do string manipulation or any kind of string formatting, again, the thing that I want you to take away from this is you need a string at the front end, and then the .accessor method allows us to use a built-in method, the static method that belongs to the string object, to do something to the original string, and then it returns something else. So you need to catch it in some kind of other variable. You can't just assume that the string is going to change or anything like that. That doesn't happen. Okay, so that's one thing. Okay, cool. We're good there. Let's keep going. So I'm going to go skip through these. And I'm not hearing any feedback, which means you guys are perfect at this, right? So if we put it on a test next time, you guys are going to get just as good as you did this test, right? People are laughing at me. Okay, no problem. Email search. This is something else. Search is interesting. So I'm searching for where it comes back. And again, it gives me the position. Search is a little different than index of, right? It does return a number, but it searches for a particular pattern or for a particular string, substring that I'm looking for. And then it gives you examples of substring. We've talked about substring, right? I'm not going to go into that too much. I want to see from a pattern perspective. Slice, one of my favorite methods, right? Slice, the reason why it's one of my favorite methods, I use it a lot, right? When it comes to string manipulation. I can actually create substrings. I use it a lot more than substring, actually, to be honest with you, because it's more flexible, because it takes negative numbers, right? So we talked about this. So I want to slice something in pieces. Again, what I'm going to do is, here's my president, at whitehouse.gov. There's a good example here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say email slice. Okay, so what are these two numbers? 0 and 9. What do you think it means? I just went over it. Okay, does it include 9 or not? And that's a good thing. That's a good way of thinking about it. Whenever I have the upper bounds of something, and usually in every programming language is like this, it's excluding up to, but excluding the number that's the maximum, the upper bound. Okay, typically. All right. There are some programming languages that don't respond this way. And I can think of Python being that way, right? But just be careful, because don't assume anything. And if you ever want to check the documentation, you can check to see how that works. Remember how did I do before with Visual Studio Code? I showed you guys how to do this. So if I want to know, how slice works, right? For example, I want to take John Smith. I know I just got a position back of 4. So I want to look at, from position 0 to 4, not including 4, we're hoping, right? It's just going to take my first name. So let's do that slice. So I'll say, first name, var, first name by itself is equal to first name, last name, right? And let's just use the space position. We know the space position is one thing, dot slice, right? And then 0 to space position, right? That's something we can probably use. We just created that, right? Pattern. So now I'm going to get my first name. Let's return that, and we're hoping we're going to get John back, right? Now the challenge is we can't tell if we're getting John back with the space or John back without a space, because we can't tell when we put it to the console, right? But let's assume if I go console log, right, and if I go first name, we should get John back by itself, right? Let's take a look and go back to the right place, John, right? So what about if I went to, instead of space position, if I want to get John plus the S, right? Just because I want to play with you guys, right? So what if I went space position plus 1, right? Let's see, what should I get? If we're right, then we'll get John plus what? Should I get the S? Well, let's see. If I count, right? If it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus 1 is 5. So should I get the space? Because it's up to, but not including this. So should I get anything back? It should look the exact same, actually. Let's take a look. Right? But if I go 6, right? So I got the next one, then I'm going to get John S. Right? So it's true. It's up to, but not including, what we're going up to. Make sense? So whenever we have an upper bound, and if, let's say, for example, you don't know what it is, what if remember I showed you how to do this? If I kind of highlight the object here, the method in Visual Studio Code or in Visual Studio, and I right-click, I can go to peak definition, right? And peak definition, what it allows us to do is actually look at, the definition of our object. So here's slice, and then it tells you what it does. It says, returns a section of a string, parameter start, the index to the beginning of the specified portion of the string object, and parameter end, the index to the end of the specified portion of the string object. The substring includes the characters up to, but not including, right there, the character indicated by the end. And this is really a good way of knowing. If you don't know the method, and if you can't remember, instead of looking it up on Google, you can always go and inspect or do a peak definition, and it'll give you that detail. All right. Again, this is IDE dependent or text editor dependent. In Visual Studio Code, Microsoft's nice enough to give us that option. All right. Okay, let's continue. because we got lots to cover. And then we'll take a break in about 10 minutes, okay, for people who need to go to the washroom and all that kind of stuff. All right, so we talked about this piece. Replace. That's pretty simple, right? What we're going to do is we're going to create a new string. We're going to look and find the first string, president, and we're going to replace it by vice president. Okay, so we're going to take the first string and return another string that has vice president, including the rest of this string. Right? So it's going to take the first string. We're looking for president, and we're replacing this part, whatever matches president, with this new part. Okay. Now remember, I want you to be very careful here, right? Because replace, I'm just going to put it out there. If someone writes another method, right, should you assume that it's perfect? Just putting it out there. I know that JavaScript people wrote this method and everything else, right? But should you assume that it's perfect? Should you assume that any method that's ever written by anybody is perfect? How about that? I'll put it out there. Come on. Who's betting that it should be perfect? How about Joanne? Joanne, you think it's perfect? You're smart, because you never know. If you shook your head, you said no, it's true. And I want you to always think like that. As developers, I want you to never believe that any method that's ever been written by anybody else is perfect, right? Because it could give you some really weird results, right? Remember, I'm searching. Whenever I do any kind of searching, sorting, any of that kind of stuff that's being handled by the back end, I don't know what I'm getting. Even with JavaScript, when I'm searching for president, right? I don't know how this thing is working on the back end. And let's actually see the code to see what they're doing, how the search function is working. I don't know, right? I would rather actually write my own search and replace method than use JavaScript's built-in, or even C#'s built-in, or even Java's built-in search and replace methods, because I can trust what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. Mind you, I might be less efficient, right? If it's been written better by somebody who's, this is a tried and true method. But just to put it out there, chances are as a developer, you shouldn't trust it. And if you don't trust it, write your own. In this case, we're pretty good. I think I've tried the replace method many, many times. You're going to get a pretty good result. All right, combining strings we've done. I'm not going to do this part. We use the plus operator, even the plus equals operator, to keep adding stuff on. I give you examples of that when we did our first assignment, so we're not going to go into that. And like I said, this is where, to me, it makes sense to have put this strings and substrings and everything else along with our string section. We talked about it back, I think it was week 4 or whatever it was, right? One thing that they do add is you can also use the formal concat method to do the same thing, right? So if I want to use whatever my string name is, concat, and I'm going to take the name, and it's going to concat it with this substring, right? So you can do that. So I have Dr. Zeus, the pen name. This is the original string, right? And I'm going to concat it was the name of, right? That's what's going to happen with the original name, whoever's the name is, which is Theodor Zeus Geisel, which is sounds like a German name. It's going to take this name here and put it at the end, right? That's what it does. It takes 2 strings, smash them together with another string in the middle to produce, a longer string, right? Did you have to use the concat method to do that? No, I can use plus, 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 plus like we've done before. Does the same thing. And more often than not, I never use this method, concat. Could I use this method? Sure. But I use the plus, 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 plus all the time. Actually, I do that even in other languages too. Java, C# does the same thing. The only where I can't do it is I can't do the same thing with Python. Python uses the dot operator for some reason or another. All right, comparing strings, we've done this before. Why the triple equals, right? The triple equals, we use triple equals to say it's not only equivalent, but also the same data type. This is where we want to do it. So triple equals, we use it in other languages as well, but specifically for JavaScript, what it does is because JavaScript is a loosely typed language, right? Dynamically typed. The number 1, in quotations 1, we've talked about this before, in quotations 1, right, is the same. It's, it looks at it like, well, it's a string, but if I'm comparing the number 1 to quotations 1, it would be true if I use the double equal, right? But if I use a triple equal and I say, well, 1 is a number, and in quotations 1 is a string, those are not equal, right? So if I want, exactly equal to is what I like to call it, right? It has to be the same data type and the same content, all right? That's what I want you to look at it. Again, you could use locale compare to compare between one language and another. I'd never use this methodology. I kind of write my own typically, but you could do this. And that's it for strings. Now we're getting into regular expressions. This is why I think this is a kind of a module that's out of order, in my opinion. Questions so far about string manipulation? That's it. Strings are done. Fine, you're good? Any problems? Okay, let's do a little bit of regular expressions. We'll do regular expressions for like 5 minutes, and I'll give you the highlights of it, and then we'll go back. So we've already done kind of regular expressions before. I love people that call me when I'm teaching. This is awesome. Happens every class, right? Even though people know my schedule. Wife. Let's go back. So one thing to know is this: when we do regular expressions, we've done it so far. We can use regular expressions as a pattern, right? So remember that we can have our pattern attribute that's built into our input. So we have input. There's a pattern that I'm looking for the input, right? And again, I can use quotations, and I can look for a particular pattern. I don't have to use this format here, but this is the actual format that we're looking for in a particular regular expression pattern. By the way, when you use regular expressions in JavaScript, you learn regular expressions in C#, Java, whatever language. It's all the same. Regular expressions are across the board the same, right? So that's why it's important to know this, right? And actually, we're going to cover it again for people who are doing my C# course. We're going to cover regular expressions one more time when we do validation. We just did forms, Windows forms yesterday for people who are in my C# class. We're going to go back there and do it again, and I'm going to use regular expressions to validate some of the data, right? It's the right thing to do from a front-end perspective. Remember, it's only for front-end validation. It doesn't do stuff on the back end too well. You have to do kind of the same thing on the back end, right? To validate you're getting the right stuff. There's two ways of doing it. One is I could use the regular expression as part of a pattern. The other one is I could use the regular expression constructor method to create a new regular expression. That's one thing that's different in JavaScript. Let's take a look at this. So here's an example. Here's my regular expression name, whatever it is, and then I use the new keyword with regular expression, regex equivalent, right? Then the first part is the pattern that I'm looking for, and a bunch of attributes. Typically, I won't use this pattern. All right, I'll tell you right now, I don't use this one at all. I'd rather use regular expressions like you've seen them before as a pattern. Why? I don't need to do this, right? Once I have a regex option, once I put a pattern, JavaScript is smart enough to understand that it's a regular expression. All right, remember it's implicit, and the reason for this is I typically don't put the attributes for the regular expression behind like this. I mean, for example, if I wanted to say something like it's case insensitive. Case insensitive for regular expression is the I character, right? We've kind of talked about this before. This is what it's expecting. What are my attributes, right, for my regular expression? So, example here in this example, we have our UL protocol. We're looking for HTTPS. That's our using the constructor notation, right? And then if I want to, I can put, because it's optional, I can put in other attributes. For example, I don't care if it's upper or lowercase with I as an attribute, right? And here's our example. So the URL. So here's the protocol that I'm looking for. My URL is HTTP. Here's the search result for my URL search. And then what am I putting in there? The pattern that I'm getting from my regular expression. That's what I'm getting. That's how it works. So what I'm saying is search for this pattern. Do I find it in the URL string? And the answer is no, because it only has HTTP, and that's why I'm getting a -1 back. Okay? We're going to do this in a second. One thing that I like a lot for me is the whole test method of the regular expression pattern. All right? So if I want to test to see if it's true or false, and there's some really good examples here on the PowerPoint to give you an example of this. Look, here's a regular expression pattern, right? There we go, right? And it's written just like this. We're going to interpret this in a second. And this is an email pattern. Notice that there is no new regex, kind of thing in there. And if I was to write this exact code if I just copy this code, you can try it yourself. If I copy it and I go back to my Visual Studio code and I write it in, just like that. So here it is. And now, well, we have a problem. Well, why am I getting a problem here? One thing is this is wrong. That's something that I copied in. And the other one is that one thing that it does expect is that it's one big long string, right? It doesn't like being broken up over different lines unless you put it in quotations. All right? So now, if I look at this, I'm not getting an error anymore. And Visual Studio Code is smart enough to know that, this looks to me, Tom, like a regular expression. If I hover over this, what does it look like? It says regex, right? That's what it is. This is good. Let's interpret what this pattern looks like. Okay, what can I do? It says I get this little caret. This little caret character in regular expression says must start at the beginning. So this regular expression pattern needs to start at the beginning, and I have a $ that says the whole pattern needs to finish by the end. This is the entire pattern for my regular expression, right? If I didn't have this, and I didn't have this at the end, the regular expression can be anywhere in the string. And that's not what I want. I need to have these two. If I really want to be explicit about my regular expression, I need to have this caret at the beginning and my $ at the end. It means that anything that's between these two characters must be included in the regular expression pattern. And it takes up the entire regular expression, the entire string. All right? If there's anything else, it'll fail. It will say that this regular expression is, or the pattern match is wrong. Let's take a look at this. I've got a couple of characters. When I have square brackets like this, we've talked about it before, right? Square brackets. When I have square brackets like this, it means that I'm going to analyze this first piece first. Then I'm going to go through and I'm going to analyze the next pieces, anything else that's in square brackets or in round brackets. I'm going to go back to this in a second. Let's take a look at this. It says I have a character that I could have an underscore character. That's one character that's allowable, right? Because I've included in there. Well, that's weird. So email could have an underscore character anywhere in the pattern. I don't know if that's really correct. I guess you could, right? And then it says A to Z, lowercase, and then A to Z, uppercase. When I have a dash, it tells me this is the range of characters. I can have a range between A, lowercase a, and Z, and uppercase A and Z, plus a 0 to 9, right? A number, a numeric value of 0 to 9. And then I get this backslash dash, right? Backslash dash. We're going to talk about that in a second. And this is the first evaluation. All right, we're going to evaluate each part of the regular expression separately. Then I got a plus. Plus usually means 0 or one or more of these. That's what it means. We'll talk about that. Then we have the second thing. We're going to evaluate the second part, which is another expression in the round brackets, right? And in the round brackets, I say, okay, I want to definitely have some kind of dot. It could include a dot. That's one thing it could include. Plus, again, A to Z, 0 to 9, and then maybe a dash. We're going to talk about this in a second. And then I can have one or more of these, right? So this, and then this is the second expression. So I need these two parts, right? And it could include one. Look, if I have the star pattern says that I could have one of these or 0 or more of these. 0 means this is an optional piece. I don't have to have the dot. Like, for example, my name would be Tom.Siliopoulos, right? Or I could have Tom Siliopoulos. I don't need to have the dot. I don't even have the second part of this at all. And this is what this tells me. I have an optional component. The star says that this piece here, the stuff that came before in the round brackets, is optional. The plus says the stuff that came before, I need at least one of these. One or more. Star says 0 or more, right? Which means is optional, right? Then I have an at, which is required. That's required. I need an at pattern. I'm looking for the at, right? Because it's outside of the square brackets. Anything outside of the square brackets is a matching pattern that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the at symbol, right? And then as I go through, I have this very similar pattern on the other end. So again, and I can have some kind of dot, right? It's not required though, right? Because it's a star. I got a star, so this pattern is not required, right? And then at the end, I have a pattern that is required where I do need a dot, right? That's outside of the square brackets. So I need a dot, and it has to be at least between two characters and 6 characters. And that's, remember we talked about this last time? We said that this might not be enough because nowadays domains could be really long. And there was actually an article that's up online saying, please don't try and use regular expressions to, against email addresses because, it will all fail, chances are. Well, somewhere or another, your user enter a really weird email address to a brand new domain and it won't work, right? So how do you take care of that? You have a question? Double backslash means it's an escape character, typically, right? So if I use a double backslash, right, what does it mean? It means that I'm going to use something that is, I'm going to include, it's an escape, right? We'll talk about this in a second, right? And it's used, the same pattern is being used over and over again. Okay. But the neat thing to know is this whole thing is a regular expression, and that JavaScript, without quotations, interprets it as a regular expression. So there is no regular, I don't need quotations. When you first look at this, it kind of looks like junk. It's like someone typed random stuff on the keyboard, right? And it came up to look like something, but yet there is a pattern if you really look carefully at this, right? So here's my email pattern. Then we'll stop in about 2 minutes for our break. Here's my email pattern, right? And then here's my email, okay? And then I have a result. This result variable is empty. It doesn't really, it's of type any right now. If we were going to follow the pattern of, of how we declare things in JavaScript, remember that unless I declare something, JavaScript doesn't know what it is, so it's going to give it the any data type, which is really bad, right? That's one part of JavaScript I don't like as a developer. We want to be able to give strong typing, and that's why I use TypeScript. Let's take a look at this. So email pattern, here's my email pattern, right? I want to test, because this is the test method is part of the regular expression object, right? I want to test email to see if it matches the email pattern. And then if it does, the result is true. And if it doesn't, the result is false. This is a great way of validating, right, whether my email is correct. And if it's not correct, I don't have to accept result as false. I can shift the focus, especially if a person's tabbed away from a control, I can shift the focus back to that control. And let's say something like, and this is common practice, select everything that's inside that control to get them to put it back in with some kind of message that says, please put in the proper pattern for your email or whatever. Questions around this? Again, we're going to talk more about regular expressions. We've talked about it before. I'm just reviewing it again now. And you're going to see it again and again and again in every language that you do. Joanne's falling asleep. So let's take a quick 10-minute break, right? When we come back, we'll continue with regular expressions. And I think we can hack through most of this, this PowerPoint.